welcome to today's video. This video is kind of different than the beauty stuff that I will be doing in future videos, but today I wanted to quickly get you guys to get to know me more, so I am sharing my testimony, which is kind of interesting and it's a long story. So I'll obviously be shortening it a little bit so you guys can watch this without being bored out of your minds. But that is what we're doing today. So let's get into it. So I grew up in a family that was very poor, that fought a lot, that was abusive, but we would go to church and I would go to daycare and learn about Jesus. Now, because of how my family was, I did not actually get to know God. My dad was abusive towards the rest of my family, and so it was hard to know what real love was like and what care really was and what being there for one another really was, because we didn't have that dynamic at home. And so I never really saw God in home. So I just never really believed. I was just like, everything had to be existed for a reason or created. So obviously there is a God, but I didn't really believe or follow on that. So inside home was a very scary place. I didn't like being home. I always thought about running away. And then outside of my home, when it was school, I was bullied by my friends, and in return I decided to bully back because that was the only defense mechanism I knew because of how I grew up at home. And any friends that I had were gone like that. There was always drama, there was always stuff going on, and I could never find a solid friend that I could confide in because of everything that was going on at home. And so there was always fights happening at school, and there was always fights happening at home. There was no real peace. And so I was very depressed at a very young age, and I always wanted to disappear. And by that, it means a lot of different things. It means running away or just wanting to die. And I remember sitting in the middle of a street and not caring if a car hit me. Or I got into a fight with one of my friends and I told her and my family that I should just die. And that happened when I was really young, before I even knew what those words meant. And it just progressively got worse as the years went on. So when I was around 7 or 8, we had these family friends that came over, and their son convinced me to do a lot of different things and told me that it was okay if he touched me and that I can touch him. And I was like, I felt really weird about it, but he told me it was okay, so I did it. And that wasn't the first time it happened. It happened with another family friend that my brother and I were friends with. And it almost happened a third time with his brother. But that didn't happen. I knew that it was wrong at that time. And it took me years to actually be okay with the fact that that happened and it wasn't my fault, because I blamed myself for years after it, that it was my fault that these things happened to me. Even though I was the victim, I blamed myself. And I know that happens with a lot of people, but this was what happened to me. And so then when I was around 9 or 10, I was at a park with one of my little friends and her mom, and I had to go to the bathroom, and so I went home, and in front of our tiny little house that barely fit the 4 of us, there was fire trucks and police cars and ambulances, and my dad was being stretched away, and I had no idea what was happening. So I go inside and I'm like, Mom, what's going on? She said that Dad wouldn't wake up. And I was super confused. I didn't know what that meant, and then I went to the bathroom. But this was something that was normal for me and my family, since my dad had went to the hospital so many times throughout my childhood. And so it wasn't very much different than the other times. I was just very confused on why they were all at our house. And Dad would always try to kill himself throughout my childhood, and so he would always be in the hospital, and we would visit him and spend time as a family when he was released for a few days or a few hours. And then he would be home, and then it would all happen again. So then he was in his coma during his birthday, and I made him a birthday card, and that was when change started happening at home. there wasn't as much name-calling or physical stuff happening, but there was still abuse. And that was when the worst of my depression hit, when I was around 12, 13, and 14. I started lying to my family about how I was feeling. I started covering up what I was doing and what I was feeling, and I started to stop showing emotion, and there was no more smiles from me, which is, if you know me now, something you can't really imagine. But when I was that age, I didn't smile, I tried not to frown, I tried to stay absolutely expressionless, so no one would know if anything was wrong or if anything was right. And then around that time I met an online friend that we would talk to day and night, and he was a devout atheist, and I was a Christian who didn't know anything about God except for the fact that he obviously created everything, and that was it. And it was because of him that I started researching about God and what he has done and who he really was. And so I was reading articles after articles, and then I started to realize more about this God that I was believing in. And it made me curious on what is my life really worth. And so for Christmas that year, I got my first Bible, and I read it. Not very much. I read maybe a few chapters of Matthew, and I thought I figured out all the mysteries of God, and I thought I was so smart. But this was around the time when I actually accepted God into my life. I was 14. And that was exactly around the time when I was praying that God would take my life away and that he would stop the pain from happening and I would just go to heaven and just stop living on this earth. And he didn't answer the way I wanted him to answer. Because God always answers, it's just not always in the way we expect. And his answer was the complete opposite of what I wanted. He let me live, which at the time really sucked. I was crying all the time, and I was wanting to hurt myself, and he didn't let me do that either, because I just felt immense guilt whenever I got close to it. But I kept praying that my life would be over, and he never answered that. So then, a couple years later, home was a little bit better, and I started to heal, and my family started to heal. My dad was no longer yelling. He wasn't always mad all the time anymore, which was so different, and I'm still healing from that, because this is a whole different life than what I grew up with. And my heart has changed since I moved, because I met Christian friends that took me in and taught me about what church life was really like and what living for God was like, and I never had that when I grew up in the city I was in. And I started learning about Jesus, and I started reading my Bible. I started reading Psalms, I read all of Matthew, and I started digging into Paul's letters and Job and Proverbs, and I never even thought there was that many books in one big Bible. But I read it, and I was so excited to learn more about God, because life had so much more meaning once he was in the picture. And for years after I picked up that Bible and started reading it, I started feeling the urges of hurting myself again, but they never took over. I felt way more stronger and just way better about my life because Jesus had his arms around me. And so every night I felt comforted when I was going to bed. And eventually I decided to go to Bible college, even though I didn't want to go to college, and if I was, it was going to be culinary school. And here I am, going to Bible college, learning about Jesus, and best decision I've ever made. I got baptized last year on March 3rd, and every single day has so much more value than the previous. And you can see it so much more. You look into life and you're like, wow, even though there's a lot of chaos happening because the world is so lost, if you look at it in a different perspective, everything is beautiful. And that was how I found Christ and actually turned into a Christian and Christ follower. So that's my story, and I know a bunch of you have different stories, and I really am glad that you watched this and got to hear my story so you guys can get to know me before I upload different videos, which I'm so excited about. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have an amazing day and find at least 5 things that bring joy to you today and spend some time outside. Alright, bye guys, and love you. Bye!